Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday School. Before we get started, I want to just apologize. I left on vacation last week, and it totally slipped my mind that I was supposed to record a Sunday School lesson for session 3. So that's what we're going to be working on. If you're looking for session 4, it is also uploaded at this time. Both of those will be live at the same time. Just go back to the YouTube channel, look for session 4. But this will be session 3 entitled Remembering God's Works. And our key idea is God instructed the people to set up a memorial as a reminder of his power. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 3, verses 14 through chapter 4, verse 9. So we're going to be looking at God asking the people to set up a memorial. Why do we as humans like to set up memorials, set up structures that commemorate things? I mean, if you look across America, we have statues, we have memorials, we have buildings, we have monuments that were built um, to commemorate some kind of thing. The Washington Monument, built to honor George Washington. The Lincoln Memorial, built to honor Abraham Lincoln. All of these things, there's tons of them all over the country, are built so that we remember what these great men who came before us did. So we've actually discovered that civilizations for thousands of years have erected statues and built monumental structures to celebrate and to memorialize significant people and events. These memorials helped following generations understand their identity and recognize how they came who they are. So God would instruct his people in the Bible to build memorials so that they did not forget who God is, that they belonged to him, and that they could always trust him. So, what are some prominent memorials? Think about some prominent memorials that you are that you are fond of, that you have seen, and why are those significant? And what impact do they have on us today? So, chapters 3 through 5 of Joshua, they accentuate three essential things that the Israelites need to remember as they enter the land of Canaan. Number one, God's presence. Number two, God's power. And finally, God's promises. So Joshua instructed the people to break camp and follow the Ark of the Covenant as it was carried by the Levitical priests. The ark represented God's presence with Israel. It would be the Lord who would lead his people to the promised land. And so we're going to be reading here about this memorial and seeing what it is. So let's begin reading there in chapter 3, verse 14. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. Now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the harvest season, but as soon as the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge, and the flowing water downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city next to Zarethan. The water flowing downstream into the seas of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite Jericho. The priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan. So the people of Israel were going across the Jordan River, and as they were crossing, those who were carrying the ark, they stepped in the water, and the water stopped flowing. It was built up. It was like an invisible bulwark or invisible dam was built there to hold the water back. God was holding the Jordan back so that the nation of Israel could cross into Canaan. After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua. Choose 12 men from the people, one man for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priests are standing, carrying them with you, and set them down at the place where you spend the night. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, one man from each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone onto his shoulder, one for each of the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what did these stones mean to you? You should tell them the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's waters were cut off. The Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites. The Israelites did just as Joshua had commanded them. The 12 men took stones from the middle of the Jordan, one for each of the Israelite tribes, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the camp and set them down there. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan where the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant were standing. Those stones are still there today. So these stones were put into a memorial to commemorate, to memorialize, to immortalize the moment where God let his people into Canaan, where he held the rushing waters of the Jordan back. Now, I am not a scholar on Middle Eastern geography. I have no idea how wide the Jordan is at this point. I don't know how hard it was flowing, but we do know that it says that it was flowing enough during the harvest season that the Jordan was overflowing its banks. And if you've ever been to North Texas to the Red River during a big rainstorm and seen the Red River rise, most of the time you cross the border into the state border into Oklahoma, and the Red River is not a huge sight to see. It's a red river. It's got clay banks. It's barely flowing in the summertime. There's barely any water going through it. It's kind of wimpy, and if you ask me, like there's not a whole lot of water going through there. But after a big storm, or after several weeks of storms and thunderstorms and rainstorms, and the Red River can swell. It can take out those bridges. The 37 bridge, Highway 37 bridge, north out of Texas, has been repaired several times, and finally now it's just built really high so that the river can basically never get up there. But several bridges near Paris, Texas, north of Paris, those get washed out and or at least flooded over several times, and several times in my lifetime. Same thing with the Sulphur River a little bit further south. And so if you're imagining a river overflowing its banks, that water is flowing swiftly, that water is flowing hard, it's deep. So this riverbed here is probably fairly deep. It would be soggy and wet, but God allowed the Israelites to cross on dry land. This is not some little babbling brook that they stacked rocks in front of and were able to dam it up for a little bit. No, this is a fully fledged large river that was flowing swiftly, or we can assume was flowing swiftly, and the people needed to cross on dry ground, and God allowed that to happen. So first, let's look at that section called dry ground. Dry ground. When the people, the Israelites who had come out of the wilderness and were being promised to enter, being prepared to enter the promised land, these are the people of Israel, broke camps across the Jordan, the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. So remember, the Ark of the Covenant was built according to God's design, and it served as a reminder to his presence with his people. So this was built after the Ten Commandments were carved, after they were given to Moses. This was built to carry the Ten Commandments and a few other religious icons, religious things, and I don't remember everything that the Ark of the Covenant carried, but it was gold, it was heavy, it was God's presence among his people, and it was set up in the tabernacle. But they were always carried it on poles with 4 men carrying it on poles, and they were carrying it across the river Jordan. And so rainfall and melting snow in the harvest time had overflowed the banks of the Jordan. And this created flood conditions. And we know about flood conditions. We've seen them here and in Texas. And so, verse 15, as soon as the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge, and the water flowing downstream stood still. So the water that was coming toward you, it stood still. So the water upstream of you, whether that would have been to their right, probably, if they were crossing west to east, or east to west, rather, and rivers flow normally north to south in the northern hemisphere, and I believe this area is in the northern hemisphere. This water would have been flowing north to south, and they would have seen the water stop to their right and flow down to their left, Probably. I could be wrong about that. Um, no, that's correct. Yeah, it flows into the Dead Sea. Um, so it is flowing north to south. So the water would have been on their right, flowing to their left, and would have stopped up beside them to their right. Um, Anyway, the water flowing downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city next to Zarethan. The water flowing downstream into the Sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, which is south of this, was completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite Jericho. The priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan. So Adam was a city that was probably 15 miles upriver of the Jordan. It was dry ground. This is a very similar experience to when they crossed the Red Sea on their way out of Egypt. And the entire nation, which is more than 600,000 men with their families and livestock and possessions. This is easily over 1 million people that is crossing the river here. And they were all able to finish crossing the Jordan on dry ground. So was a barrier that God was able to remove. But when we think about barriers today, we might have physical barriers. There might be things physically keeping us from uh, physically trying to prevent us from our spiritual journey. But I would say most of our barriers now are not tangible in such a way. But why are barriers an important physical or either tangible or non-tangible, untangible, an important part of our spiritual journey? Well, because they cause us to have faith, because our God is a God who breaks down barriers. He gets us to where we need to be, and in whatever way he needs to do that. Will defy the laws of physics and nature. He will make things that seem impossible possible. Luke 18:27, for with men, things that seem impossible are possible with God. So barriers are important because they increase our faith when we trust in the Lord, and he breaks those barriers down. So then Joshua tells them to, or God tells them through Joshua to erect these memorial stones. This is verses 1 through 7 of chapter 4. After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, choose 12 men from the people, 1 man for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priests are standing, carry them with you, and set them down at the place where you spend the night. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, 1 man for each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone onto his shoulder. These big stones, heavy stones. Onto his shoulder, 1 for each of the Israelite tribes, so that it will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, what do these stones mean to you? You should tell them the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial or a lasting physical illustration of God's power and his covenant among the Israelites for the Israelites. So, what are some milestones that could remind people of God's work in their lives? Well, if you were to set up a memorial in time of when you were saved, when you got married, when your child was born, we have these things, especially if you're on Facebook. If you're on Facebook and you post things regularly, every year you get reminded of what you used to post the years prior. I have gone back and deleted things from 2009 because they'll show up privately in my memories. And I created my Facebook in 2009 when I was a freshman in high school. And I don't know that 32-year-old Chris right here would be friends with 15-year-old Chris, 16-year-old Chris in 2009. Not sure that we would have been friends. He was foolish, to say the least. And so I've gone back and deleted things. But there's also very good reminders of how life used to be, what I did, what my family was up to at those times. And so that's a good reminder, and we have that. But there are also photo albums that many keep. Where Grace is in the middle of making a photo album, baby book for Tucker and everything. We celebrated his 6-month birthday yesterday. It's hard to believe that he's 6 months old already. Half a year has gone by since he was born. And so we can see moments in time of what God has done when we remember it. If we write it down, if we memorialize those moments in our mind or physically with some kind of reminder of when God was gracious to us. We celebrate anniversaries, we celebrate birthdays, all of those kinds of things. We can do those same things when God is good. We have a plaque in the office, the church office, commemorating and memorializing our EBC's 100th anniversary as a church after I believe First Baptist Emory and Salem Baptist Church, I believe. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Combined to create Emory Baptist Church, and that is there in the office. And we have something from the SBC, I believe, celebrating our 100th anniversary back in 2015. So let's move on to our lasting reminders. This is verses 8 and 9 of chapter 4. The Israelites did just as Joshua commanded them. The 12 men took the stones from the middle of the Jordan, one for each of the Israelite tribes, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the camp and set them down there. Joshua went and set up also in the middle of the Jordan where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and set up 12 stones, and those stones are still there today. So Joshua set up stones where the priests stood all day long. As people were moving across the Jordan, the priests had to stand there and hold that so that the river could be held back. And Joshua set up where they stood, set up 12 stones so that they could remember what God did in the middle of the Jordan. So, with all this in mind, how can previous experiences with God strengthen a person's faith? I think this is probably where my faith comes from, is past experiences. Because God has proven himself to be faithful in my past, I am more willing to believe that he will continue to be faithful, especially if I am faithful to him. And so when things happen, when things are rough, for example, we're having to get Grace's car repaired. It's going to be quite an expensive repair, but God is faithful and God has provided for us. Last year, my car broke down several times, and God was faithful to provide then. So now, especially when we're in a better spot financially now than we were last year, only because of God's faithfulness to us, we are able to not need to ask for help with Grace's car this time. We had to ask for help last year with my car, and ABC members and our deacons were very faithful and Lord and very gracious to us and generous to us. But now, because of God's favor and because of God's faithfulness to us, we are able to take care of this repair on our own. And that's only by the Lord. That's not anything I did or anything Grace did. That is all given to God. And I wasn't very worried about it when the repair actually came to be needed, because God got us through the last one. And so I knew he would get us through this one. And so, how can we pass on our faith stories to future generations? Be open with your testimony. Be open with the things that God has done. Don't hold those in. Tell those stories. Tell how God has been faithful. Tell about the miracles that have happened in your life. Miracle in mine and Grace's life. We did not expect to conceive quickly when we were trying to have Tucker. When we were trying to conceive, Grace has quite a few things that are working against her in as far as conception, as far as pregnancy and those kinds of things. And God was gracious, and yeah, we tried for a while, but it wasn't multiple years. It was a couple of months. And I'm thankful for that. And we both attribute that to the Lord and the Lord alone, because he was faithful to us. Because I have friends and she has friends who are much, I would say probably much less predisposed to having pregnancy issues and they've taken longer to conceive than it took us. And we're so thankful we didn't go through a miscarriage or anything like that beforehand. That it um, was as orchestrated by the Lord as it possibly could have been, which was 100% all the way through. And so that will be a story that I tell our children when they are old enough to hear it. That will be a story that I will tell church members and friends and family members all day long, because it was only because of the Lord. And if that helps increase somebody else's faith, then that is the best thing possible. So remember what God has done in your lives. Remember what God has done for you. So that when trials come and barriers come and obstacles come, because they will, not if they will, but when they will, you can have faith that God will get you through them, because he has gotten you through so much already. So that brings us to the end of session 3. Again, if you are looking for session 4, that video will be up. If it's not up already when you're at the time of seeing this one, it will be up very shortly. I'm recording these back to back, so that just be on the lookout for that one. But thank you for being with me today. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.